It's Ryan Lizzo with Telus News here for my weekly chat with my good buddy Steve Schmidt of The Warning. Um, Steve, let's let the crowd build a little bit before we get into it. But like a lot of viewers, I imagine you and I just watched a typical Trump press conference, which is to say, completely batshit crazy. And I don't know what else we were going to talk. A lot of stuff to talk about, but obviously we got to get into that and break that down. But while we let people join, let's tell me what's going on. What have you been doing since the last time I saw you?
Well, enjoying the summer,
Yeah, Blue Jays hat
hang,
for those who don't
hanging
know.
out, hanging out,
Toronto, Toronto Blue
watching
Jays becoming
watching
more.
the first place Toronto Blue Jays
You're becoming
uh,
more and more Canadian by the week.
coming back into town, coming back into Toronto here soon. Um, yeah, great baseball team, fun to watch. I've got so for me, I've got back into watching baseball this year after really like a long absence. Like I would go to a couple games a year, but I watch most games, probably gone to 2025 this year, and it's a nice distraction from all the politics. And when most of the games I've seen this year have been in Toronto, right? And there's this moment, that's for me as an American, it's very poignant in every game, which is that the American national anthem is played, um, sung, and you have Jays games are sold out, and you have the aggressions of the Trump administration against Canada. You have insanity against Canada that Trump has let loose on the economy. And there's not one game where I've heard a single boo at the American national anthem. The Canadian crowd stands there. That crowd is rooting for the United States.
Hmm.
And you really listen to the words, right? You listen to the words, right? Through the twilight's last gleaming, right? And the question about that hung in the air in that song, that we sang is, would the flag be there? Would it endure? And so we're at a time of testing. We have and this was always inevitable, uh,
What happened
a,
today?
a federal occupation of Washington, really a rescission of home rule in Washington, D.C., which means that the federal government has taken over completely the functions really that you think of as, well, if you have a city government with elected officials and people can vote and people can choose their elected representatives, all of this becomes more important, I think, when you look at that cast of these cartoon villains up there, this all white and Cash Patel cast of comic book characters in an overwhelmingly majority African American city that has a long history of segregation and has a long history of class separation and has a long history uh, of oppression regarding blacks. And you look at the White House built by slave labor, the Capitol building, and the redemption of the institutions in the country over time, the fulfillment, right, of Dr. King's dream that at the Capitol, where Barack Obama is sworn in, where Dr. King goes carrying the American flag, he says to cash a promissory note right, to redeem a check because he read somewhere that all men are created equal. And so this city, our nation's capital, the face it presents to the world, and it's going to appear to be a militarily occupied, capital at war. And, so there's so many different levels to examine what happened today through the incoherence and insanity from the sneering and the snickering of the very juvenile Pete Hegseth and Pam Bondi, both two losers behind them. The compliance of the press corps, you got Pam Bondi standing there. You got an alleged rapist in Pete Hegseth, and no one's going to ask him a question about Jeffrey Epstein, right? In the press, Donald Trump saying today that federal law enforcement can do whatever the hell they want, abuse anyone they want, beat anyone they want. So, there's going to be um, a really dark feeling in Washington D.C. if you live there. I know. I wonder how you feel about it listening to it. I mean, I'll say this. You know, I you said at the beginning of the call, the beginning of the chat here is kind of another typical Trump press conference. I'm not sure I agree on that. I'm not sure I've ever seen him fucking crazier than he was today. Right, with the cast of characters behind him.
Um, the entire thing from start to finish is got me in a sad, sad
Yeah.
mood. Been covering this guy for a decade now, and this was I don't think I've ever been as depressed as I am right now, Steve, about where we're headed. Maybe it's because I live in DC. Maybe it's because I've spent so much time in that briefing room and in eras when it wasn't like this. But I mean, just go from that image of this press corps that's been taken over by propagandists and sycophants who laugh and chuckle at the idea that 800 National Guard troops are going to come to DC. I mean, that's the first thing, is just how he has neutered the press and helped install all of these propagandistic morons in that room who will never challenge him in any way. And then to see the pathetic cast of characters that he surrounds himself with, a couple of Fox News idiots like Pete Hegseth and Janine Pirro. That's just the optics. But then, if it was a sort of circus like that, where we didn't actually have to worry that they were doing anything horrible, that would be one thing. But then this is serious. This is the crisis that we've all been predicting and heading towards for a long time. I'm sure it was pushed by the constant attempt to change the subject from Jeffrey Epstein. And then you get into the lying. He's talking about a Washington D.C. and describing a Washington D.C. that does not exist. Donald Trump doesn't know Washington D.C. Donald Trump doesn't leave the White House when he's in Washington D.C. He has absolutely no contact with this city. Unlike previous presidents, he doesn't socialize in Washington D.C. He doesn't go to the restaurants. He lives in a bubble in the West Wing and the residence, and does not get out of that. When he does, he goes to Mar-a-Lago or one of his other golf courses. And obviously, it's Trump, so he's just going to make a whole bunch of shit up and lie from start to finish. DC's is experiencing a 3-decade low in crime, like many other cities. Everyone knows that one of the hallmarks of the last few decades has been um, a general drop in crime across the country, with some important exceptions. But DC is not the hellscape he described. Believe me, we have problems like every big city, but that was a bunch of bullshit, obviously. Um, and then you just immediately you see the Republican reaction and completely predictable. People who claim they care about small government, local control, federalism, and absolutely have no principles whatsoever. One of the first responses here from James Comer, one of our brilliant representatives from Kentucky. I'm joking, obviously. He's the chairman of the House committee that has jurisdiction over Washington, D.C.'s affairs. And what do you think Comer said, Steve? I think Comer said, this is disgraceful. This is a violation of everything that conservatives believe in. Mr. President, please reverse yourself. Do you think he said that?
He did not.
He did not. He said President Trump is rightly using executive power to take bold and necessary action to crack down on crime and restore law and order in Washington, D.C. Again, these are people who don't leave their fucking bubble in Congress or the Republican, club up there or the RNC where they're making fundraising calls. These are people who do not get out in Washington. And the other people in the White House, they live either at like City Ridge or these other, short-term rentals. They're not integrated into this city. They're not locals. Now, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a bad thing, but this is all a stunt. This is all a stunt, Steve. There's
Do you
So
know
anyway,
how
those are my initial thoughts. And frankly, I'm just I'm like bordering between sad and, punctuated by bouts of anger and scared because we know what's going to happen. If he follows through on this, there are going to be protests. Washington has a very active protest community. Some people who are quite responsible, a lot of people who like to fuck shit up. There's like every big city, there's a radical element. There are going to be protests. There's going to be a clash between these troops and those people. It's going to create a violent conflict. Any idiot can predict this. That's what he wants. That's what he wanted in LA. And then what's going to happen is he's going to escalate and he's going to use it as justification to escalate. And all the fucking morons in Congress who will do anything he says will be right behind him in terms of the escalation and the power grab. And anyone who's been watching this over the last 6 months can see that that's where this is headed. Anyway, I cut you off. Those are my initial thoughts.
what when you think about Donald Trump in this moment, and you look at his long public track record of racial animus, bigotry, inflammatory defamations in the public square. You got to go back to the Central Park Five in New York City, where he pointed a finger at five black men, young black men, and demanded the death penalty for them. Right, absent evidence after this horrific attack. And so, I mean, I think everybody who's watching this knows that person, right? Who's just terrified of something, right? Like whether it's a shark at the beach, right? Or it's a snake in the woods, right? Or a bear, right? That, they can't go to Wyoming because there's bears there, right? They can't go to the beach, right? Because there could be a shark. For Trump, who you point out, doesn't really go anywhere, right? He goes to Bedminster, he goes to Mar-a-Lago. The thing in his frontal lobe, right? The predator of the Trump subconsciousness, right, is like the young black guy, right? It's a young black male, right? It's the predator, right,
Yeah,
of the Trump id, right, of the Trump imagination, and this has been
of
true for
course.
40 years, right? So this guy comes down the escalator
He's
talking
a
about,
he's a he's a ra- he's a
the
he's a racist from
Mexicans,
Queens.
the Mexicans as rapists and murderers, and so here we are, say 11 years later, and he's got two of the greatest stooges in American history standing behind him, which I think probably, when you deconstruct the whole event, fact that he's got the giggling Secretary of Defense and the Attorney General of the United States is really a declaration that the U.S. military has fallen as a non-political entity, and that the rule of law in the United States has fundamentally collapsed. And that's a signal that he's trying to send out loud and clear with all of this. And it's tough to watch. It's tough to watch for sure. And to your point, the projection of power like this is to create the conditions for its justified use. And so what Trump is trying to do is to provoke a conflict that will play out on television. The first, second presidential made for riot, produced on Q by Donald Trump, the first on January 6th, and whatever's coming next. So, of course, one of the things he said about all this today is the fact that it's coming soon to a city near you.
This is
And
the test
protection
run.
of federal force in this manner, is something that it's going to be disapproved of by the American people. One and two, uh, it really highlights what's a fundamental problem, at this hour, 7 months in, which I think rightly should drive a little bit of fear, which is that we're now in an environment where Trump is growing less popular by the day, but in many ways more powerful by the hour. And that equation, right, doesn't work out, right, if you're on the side of liberty and freedom. And he's becoming more assertive, more aggressive, more crazy, and there's getting to be less and less space to back up.
Yeah. And I've got some of the news reports about this up just to sort of familiarize people who are watching with what exactly is going on. Unlike California, or where he nationalized the National Guard, or federalized the National Guard, DC, because we're not a state, because we don't have any fucking rights, we don't have control over anything. At the end of the day, as this shows, he has broad latitude to do what he wants with the Washington, D.C. National Guard. Didn't call them up on January 6th, of course, to stop the rioters that he then later pardoned. But he can call, he can do this. The other part of that press conference that we didn't get to, Steve, that is frankly going to be a complete mess. And my fear is that it actually hamstrings policing in this city and makes the city more dangerous, is that Pam Bondi and the Department of Justice said there will be a federal takeover of the Metropolitan Police Department. Okay. And then Fox News's Pete Hegseth, who happens to be our defense secretary, said that he was prepared to send the military to Washington if needed. That's a quote, if needed. All right. So you have two of the worst public officials in American history. One taking over our police department in the city, and the other saying he's prepared to use the military. I have never throw it in the chat if I'm wrong, but Pete Hegseth is the defense secretary, supposed to defend the United States from outside enemies. How many times does this guy talk about threats from abroad? The only threats these guys talk about are internal threats. The only threats they talk about are their internal perceived enemies who happen to be political opponents and Democrats. And we've known that about Trump for a long time, but he has found a defense secretary who cares more about domestic issues than foreign threats. And, we could get into the rest of that press conference and the crazy shit he said about Ukraine and Russia, and how we have another turn here where he's moving against Zelensky and preparing to sell out the Ukrainians, all the while putting it in terms that are complete bullshit, saying that the Europeans are pushing him to do this. Um, anyway, so we have a Department of Justice led by someone who will do anything Trump says, and a Department of Defense, and the three of them led by someone who will do anything Trump says, and the three of them are now conspiring to take over this city's police department, deploy almost 1,000 troops, and threaten to send in the military. This is not going to end well.
No, no. There were quotes in there today about him collecting the homeless people and sending them, quote, far away, end quote. And again, he was inaugurated on January 20th, and the building he broadcast from today was the White House in the United States. And there's no reporter who bit and just said, well, I'll bite on that one, Mr. President. Where are they going? Are we shipping them to the east, to Greenland, right? Into the ocean. And
Doesn't
this is where things historically go off the rails, right? Which is, you look at the Iceman, right? You look at somebody like Dean King, and you look at that guy and you say, what's wrong with that guy? Right? This is somebody who's part Japanese American, Princeton graduate, played Superman.
yeah,
And what he wants to do is put on a mask and beat gardeners in Home Depot parking lots, and he thinks that's patriotic, right? The torture, the concentration camps, the abuses, that what Trump is to me, and I've been right about this on a long period of time, is a fascist. Trump is a fascist. This
100%.
is this is American fascism. There is no place in the society, right, where there is not the heavy hand of the government now, right? You oppose Donald Trump, you're crushed. You dissent from what he says, you're crushed. You oppose the reality that he asserts is real, you're destroyed. Right. And so on and so forth. And the reality is there going to have to be enough of us to say bullshit to that. And the name for those people are patriots, right? And have always been understood as such in the United States. And so, when Donald Trump goes out there today and acts crazy, we can talk about that. When he's got two of the most unfit public officials in the history of the country behind him abusing their power, we should talk about that. But in addition to it, we have to be able to talk with some depth about the meaning of individual rights, about the assertion of power, about the authority of the government, because we have traveled in to dangerous waters, and the fundamental political proposition is for Democrats to be able to embrace with great strength the idea of taking power away from the most entrenched and powerful interests in the country, which starts with the office of President of the United States. And I'm a big believer in visualization
Hmm.
uh, in terms of achieving a goal. And I am appalled at the institution that has been so feckless in opposing this, right? The Democratic Party. But what's so important in this moment is for somebody out there to start visualizing the scraping of all that gold shit off of the Oval Office walls, right? And the construction boom, if there's a foundation laid, that's going to take out that fucking ballroom, and the crane that's going to drop that Qatari plane into the Atlantic Ocean off of Mar-a-Lago, which is going to be a new marine preserve. And then the filing of the ethics reform legislation, that these institutions belong to us, to we the people. And we have to start imagining this moment beyond the present tense of the extremism of whatever outrage comes out of his mouth in whatever second he happens to say it, and expand our horizon to consider that what we are in the process of losing was fought for at great expense, preserved at incredible expense, and understood until very recently as being something worthy of those types of sacrifices. And more than anything else, I think there's a question that lingers in the air in the country that Andrew Solomon started to get to, right, in an essay that he wrote, which is the great American indifference of this moment to our
That's the
liberties and to our rights. But
that's the worst
I
part of
have
this.
no
Yeah.
intention of living in a city under some type of military occupation by a dime store Mussolini. And it must be opposed.
It has to be. And the indifference is just sort of, you know, uh, really depressing. And the the nature of our politics right now is that anything Trump does that angers, outrages, disgusts his political opponents, doesn't matter what it is. If it's a stupid proposal about changing, a room in the White House or the Rose Garden, uh, or putting troops in the streets. Um, it doesn't matter if it's a minor thing or a violation of the basic norms, principles, and sometimes laws of the country. If he does it and it pisses off the other side, MAGA will cheer. MAGA will cheer. If he went down to Fifth Avenue and shot a protester, MAGA would cheer. It does not matter because the absolutely fucked up nature of our politics is, at the end of the day, anything that triggers the libs is fair game and has to be supported. And over the last decade, we've watched this just escalate and escalate and escalate. And that's what you're going to see immediately. You're going to see everyone on Fox News justify this. They're going to be talking about how people like you and me are overreacting. They're going to say this is a great thing, and Obama should have done it, or why aren't Democrats on board? Every senior Republican leader in Congress is going to cheer this. The propagandists in the MAGA media world, a few of them will squirm a little bit, but defend it in the end or dismiss it as not that big a deal. And every time that happens, he learns a little bit more about what he can get away with. And he's no dummy. He's extremely street smart, like most fascists. And he tests and he tests and he tests the limits of his powers. And every time he's not stopped by Congress, by a pliant press corps, by the courts. He pockets that victory and pushes it a little bit harder the next time. And that's what we're going to see here. Sure. Is there a chance that this won't be a big deal, Steve? That these poor National Guard guys will be in the streets and never do a thing, and the DOJ takeover of the Metropolitan Police here in Washington turns into a disaster, and they realize, wait a second, we can't run a local police department. We could barely run the Department of Justice. Is that possible? It is. It is. He's proposed other things that have seemed really, really bad that didn't go anywhere. So I don't want to, I want to temper the sort of fears that I have with a little bit of sometimes our worst fears are not realized with his harebrained schemes because he loses interest in things very quickly. That's possible. But the thing that I think viewers should be worried about and on guard about is this is the this is the thing everyone has been worried about. Putting troops in streets, trying to create a confrontation. He's not trying to solve any problem. There's no problem in DC right now that the Metropolitan Police can't fix. There's no problem with crime in DC that will be addressed or fixed by Pam fucking Bondi and Pete Hegseth. So whatever crime problems they have in DC, this is not the solution. But what it really looks like is a prelude to creating the kind of confrontation where he will demand more and more authority, and he will have Congress right by his sides. And it's only August. The midterms are a long way off. And, every crazy thing that people have been scared of about martial law and taking away rights and flooding the streets with military, all that stuff is on the table and is in the realm of possibility. And if anyone at this point thinks that shit can't happen here, they are deluding themselves.
I spent some time in Iraq in 2005. And one of the first takeaways in Iraq 2 years after the invasion is that the highway between the airport and the green zone, Route 1, Route Irish, right, the so-called highway of death, was not secured 2 years into the American occupation, right? Meaning we didn't control the highway. The American military, powerful though it may be, is not competent to the task of occupying the United States. And it ought not to try. Now, I don't know why, right, all of this generation's hedge fund generals like David Petraeus, right, have not spoken out about the politicization of the military. But what I suspect is we won't hear a word. And so what I know is that in the future, in the immediate future, in 2028, this homeland security monstrosity needs to be taken apart completely. It doesn't keep us safe. It is the gravest threat to the liberty of the American people. An artificial intelligence driven security state with unchecked surveillance powers, the fuck out of here. We, the people, are sovereign in the United States. And so the answer to this for Democrats is not some arithmetic of identity politics. that says if we can get enough blacks and Hispanics back in the tent, plus all the lesbians and trans people, and so on, this hyphen and that hyphen, and so on, we'll be able to put together a coalition. The only thing that can stop this is an embrace of the only identity that can stop MAGA, and that's an American identity. And the American identity is one that believes in justice for all. It believes in a constitution. It believes in a republic of laws. It believes in fairness and decency and the virtues that Lincoln described as the better angels of our nature. And these things are in absolute contestation in this country right now, in this moment, and they deserve and they demand a clarion voice to articulate them. And the search for that voice, right, as we wait to hear it rise, is something that I think there's a lot of anticipation about in the country, a lot of angst about amongst Democrats, because here's the deal. The American side is the strong side of the debate against MAGA. But MAGA is stronger than the identitarian politics of the woke Democrats. And so the choice is present. The flag has got to go up the pole, right? It's the American identity that the Democratic Party has to stand for, or we lose the country, right? And it's just as simple. It's just as simple as that. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and I encourage everybody. I'm hard on CNN on the warning, right? Because it's gone off the rails, to say the least. But hats off to Pamela Brown on her reporting about Pete Hegseth's pastor who doesn't believe women should have a right to vote, believes that slavery was a good thing and the slaves had it good. And this guy is a 10-star whack job. He's a theocrat. He's a handmaid tale commander type character in real life. And these people have political power in the country. And there's a reason he felt comfortable going out on CNN and saying, hey, this is what I believe. And for all the people that were offended by Jeremiah Wright, right?
I was just going to
Jeremiah
say,
Wright was never a person with power. This guy around Pete Hegseth is a person with a great deal of power and influence, and it's growing and it's terrifying.
someone in the chat said Pamela Brown is a great reporter, and Pamela is someone I've known for a long time. And just want to reiterate, she is a great reporter, a great human being. Um, and that is the issue when we get into some of the press criticism. Every one of these institutions, you attack them a lot more than I do, Steve, but every one of these places has individuals who are doing great work.
Yeah, I attack
Um,
management,
but ma-
right?
and that's the problem. That's the problem, is that they have too many business interests, and Trump has been able to leverage government regulatory power over these enormous corporations to bring their newsrooms to heel. He's the first president to really do this in a in the since Nixon, um, in an aggressive, systematic way. Um, and people forget there a lot of the stuff that Trump is doing. There have been plenty of eras in America where presidents have done that stuff. The Kennedy era and the Hoover era at the FBI, obviously Nixon, but the post Watergate era. I mean, we will look back on the post Watergate reforms and the institutions and norms that had bipartisan support for, if I've got my, 40 years basically, 40 or 50 years, depending on where you date it, as a golden era in America when there was just a massive penalty for doing any of the kind of things that Trump does on a daily basis, where your own party would not let you get away with that stuff. The press corps would not, and he picked the lock of the system, and uh, elites have just been completely delegitimized in so many ways. Before Trump ever came along, and all of the defenders of those norms are either gone or, for whatever reason, discredited in the eyes of the public. And we've talked about this before, Steve. Um, I don't know if we ever get back to that world, but we were lucky from the 70s to 2017 to live in a world where that stuff really did matter. Not to say that government officials didn't do bad stuff and that presidents didn't do bad stuff and that they didn't lie and cheat and have all sorts of scandals, but the the system of checks and balances and a robust press worked pretty damn well in that era, and you couldn't get away with the stuff that Trump is getting away with. And I ask myself all the time, what the hell changed? Why is it different? And the biggest reason is that he leads a cult-like party that hates Democrats more than they love the institutions and principles of the United States. And they will let him do anything, absolutely anything. And I think we're just scratching the surface of what a Republican led Congress and a pliant press corps and a group of MAGA propagandists who are increasing in their influence and power will will let him do.
Well,
And I think it leaves half the country feeling just absolutely powerless.
there's a fella named Jeffrey Sonnenfeld who's a Yale University management professor, and Jeffrey hosts a CEO summit, big CEOs. I've participated in it. And the CEOs get together, and Jeffrey uh, studies the CEO and their role in American life, and has posited over recent years that they are a um, moral ballast, right, in the society. And all of that has been disproven, right? This idea that, right, whatever the corporate buzzword was, for doing good, shared purpose, shared value, it's all horseshit, right? It's all nonsense. And when you look at this moment, in order to fight this, right, Democrats have to be stronger, right? They have to be stronger, right? Trump has a 39-40% approval level, but it's double the closest Democrat. That opposition coalition, which is the majority, ranges from Joe Walsh to Zohran Mamdani, right?
Yeah.
It's very
Yeah.
broad,
Yeah.
right? But it's not deep. It's disputatious, right? It lacks the fervor. So what's the unifying piece? What's
And
the
it's just to
unifying
add one
element?
other thing to how the infighting, the people at the top of that coalition, the Democratic leadership, are deathly afraid of the populist movements in their party and constantly afraid of being overthrown, which I think is a major factor in the inability of Democrats to like actually bring that coalition together. So anyway, sorry to interrupt you, but
What I would say, like to somebody that I admire, I like Cory Booker, and but but you watch that what took place this afternoon, and you're one of the 45 Democrats in the caucus, and your conclusion is let's keep Chuck Schumer in there. Let's get him reelected next year for 6 more years. I mean, what's the plan? What's the fucking plan? And somebody needs to step out. Now, for example, right, I'm looking at my watch, right? You know, Trump was still going when I got off, but right, 30 seconds after he's out, there should be some Democratic leader going out saying, "Let me get this right. The woman who's covering up the Epstein scandals now in charge of the DC homicide department." Right?
I mean, it's just a joke. It's just a joke.
If I was the police captain, I'd have my homicide detectives bring a copy of all the files and dump them on the fucking floor over the lobby of the Department of Justice Attorney General's office. Right? We live in a country where the states created the federal government, not the other way around.
Here,
Right?
here.
And the rights that we have, right, don't come from a grant of government. In the powers that are being asserted in many instances are unlawful and they're unjust. Right? But where is the voice that says to the private prison contractor and to the federal agent and to the federal employee that there are no secrets behind those walls in your concentration camp? We'll know everything you did, everything. And so the idea that we're powerless is a tool of the powerful that becomes a self fulfilling prophecy in a condition where dissent is chilled, retribution is in the air. And all of this is like a wet sand, a wet cement. And it requires people to appreciate that in this moment, you have to, if you believe in this country, you have to believe in it in order to fight for it. That now is a moment that requires every decent American to appreciate not just why Trump is doing what he's doing, and not just why what he's doing is wrong, but why it's wrong and why it's antithetical to some of the cornerstones of our civilization, right? To the reason why things are the way things are. Very important moment for people to have a handle on.
I think you are right. You know, I at the beginning of this, I talked about how watch the statements coming from Republicans in Congress. They will range from 100% supportive, maybe even Trump should go further, to um, some mild hand wringing from one or two senators up there about I'd like some more information about this, but you know it seems fine, right? But in general, it'll be 99% supportive, um, and we know that that's as easy as to predict as anything. What is more interesting, as you point out, is how Democrats respond. How do Democratic senators respond? Um, How do the people who run DC respond? This is a big test for city leadership that, frankly, is not, you know, prepared to deal with this because it's not, should have been on their radar, but this is not what they do. The mayor of DC has been criticized in the past. I don't think she deserves this criticism. She's not. She's a local kind of bureaucrat. She's fine, but she has been criticized in the past for trying to keep relations with the White House good. She has not been out there condemning Trump, uh, attacking him. And I can see why people, especially in DC, which tends to be pretty liberal, have some people have had a problem with that and wanted her to be more vocal. Um, but I can also see some of the wisdom of trying to contain this completely immature and volcanic personality and not wanting to be on his radar because at the end of the day, he and Congress have a lot of power over DC. So that's the line she's tried to walk this year, just to give people a little bit of local understanding of the politics here. Um, Now he's crossed a line. He's taken over her police department. He's sending troops into her city, taking over the National Guard that is nominally, a DC National Guard. And she's staring at the threat from Pete Hegseth that the military, actual Defense Department troops that are supposed to be deployed to defend the country um, could be deployed in the streets of Washington to do what, unsaid. So this is going to be a big test for local city leaders who, frankly, if you visited your local city hall in your city, in most cities in this country, it's not their area of expertise, and a lot of leadership in a lot of big cities in America can be wanting. So I think it's going to be really important to watch that. I know there's some protests down in front of the White House already. There are some statements coming out from local officials who are calling this unlawful. And, not an expert. I'm not enough of an expert on this to know, but there will be some immediate court challenges. I assume, and we'll have to see where those go. But our institutions are not equipped right now to stand up to
I
this.
want, I want,
Congress, the press, the courts.
I
We're
want. It's deeper than that. There are a group of people, and a bunch of them were standing behind Trump today. And what they want is to receive word that federal forces have opened fire on Americans, right? So they can go out there and say they put down a coup. And then we will have well and truly come full circle from January 6th. And so the incitements to violence are not being made by the demonstrators. They're being made by Tom Homan and by Kristi Noem and by her
100%.
boyfriend, Corey Lewandowski, and by Sector Chief Bovino, and by all of the federal thugs. And today was the first step in an assertion of power that Trump has to assert, with the threat to assert it in places where he does not have the power to assert it, in advance of what will be a declaration that will give him a power to assert it, which is some type of martial law. And what his justification is that the cities are occupied and they're under siege. And the inherent message in all of this is the black woman's not competent to the task of running the city, so white men need to take it over. And that the gangs of the black hooligans are so vicious and so great to the suffering white population that we need to deploy the 82nd Airborne to contain it. That's what this was about today.
Yeah.
And so when you watch the performance, incoherent as it was, if he was in a recording studio, right, he lays down his track, and the horns will come in later, and the horns are Fox News tonight. So we'll watch on Fox, right, marauding images of dangerous black youth. Right, we'll have the stream section filled in. We'll have, right, all the statistics, right? We'll have all the fear mongering, right? We'll have all that, right, fired up across the propaganda network, right? And in the end, right, when you consider everything fully, right, in the full blossom of all the absurdity, right, the woman that is about to be directly involved in pardoning the child sex trafficker is standing behind the convicted felon next to the accused rapist who goes to the Pentagon with his wife, who's nicknamed Miyoko Ono, who can't leave his side to keep him from fucking one of the Navy captains' wives while he's away at sea, right? Or getting shit faced at work, right? They got their makeup studio in the Pentagon. The guy's got classified strikes and military orders, right? On signal chats. He's a fucking buffoon, right? A clown and a joke, right? Beyond any dimension of my right minded to be able to describe, right? Like a punchline, right, beyond measurement, and they're standing there and they're laughing, right, in there, right, in there, and they got their, like, they're snickering. And right, Trump makes this joke, right, and he makes a threat about the agents can do whatever they want, or he lays out that witty retort, Governor Newscum, right, or he makes a hit on JB Pritzker's weight, right. And what it shows is that there is no blind justice in America, not anymore. You have a partisan hack that's a cartoon villain, a bleach blonde dummy, standing behind him to the left, and on the right side, Pete Hegseth, who is really, is almost like a computer animated Max Headroom type villain, right? It's almost like that he's not even a real person. But we have the worst of the worst and the lowest of the low. And what they did is they pointed a bayonet at the throat of Lady Liberty today, and they're coming. And ICE is the 15th biggest military in the world by funding. And the Democratic Party that holds out that, hey, the most important issue is maintaining Chuck Schumer as leader, doesn't get it. Right. What has to happen is the big tech bosses need to lose their power. Right. These companies need to be broken up. The economy needs to be fundamentally restructured, right, by defenestrating, right, institutions that have grown way too powerful. And that starts with the executive branch, and that commences with a Congress that starts reclaiming its power, right? As a co-equal branch of government. And going back to the point you made earlier, how all this happened, it happened because over the last 25 years, starting primarily in the Bush administration, Congress has just utterly abdicated its authority and power and surrendered its ability to check Donald Trump. And this is what Democrats have to run on. They have to run on a specific asking for power to make this stop. And that's what the 2026 election has to be. It has to be to ask for a national mandate from Democrats, independents, Republicans, Americans of all faiths, all creeds, right? All different races, backgrounds from all over the country. You don't agree on anything together to make this fucking stop. Make it stop. That's the campaign. and
Yeah.
that's what has to happen. And I see we have a good question, Sue, and I like whatever the question was, we can answer it. We should
What was
call it
it?
afternoon as we're at our hour.
What was the question? Oh,
I
will we
didn't see the
survive this?
question. I just said someone
Oh,
Sue
good
said it was a
question.
good question.
Yeah. Well, will we survive this was the question. And I used to be much more optimistic than I am now. I think we'll survive this generally, but what comes on the other side of this is going to be something totally new.
Well,
I used to think naively that Trump was an aberration and we would go back to the old politics that you and I grew up on, Steve, that I think we increasingly look back on as weirdly a golden age. Just because Trump has destroyed so much, but we're not going back to that. Hopefully there will be a moment of reform and reflection and maybe reconciliation at some point way down the line. But things are going to get a lot worse in this
I'm gonna
country,
I'm gonna
I believe.
I'm gonna I'm gonna
Good.
the infection has spread beyond the bad generation of leaders, but boy, is that baby boomer generation of political leadership been awful for the country, right? As a composite in total, compared to what came before. And this is the worst Congress in American history, with the possible exception to the few in the run up to the Civil War. And country's in a real crisis. And we're going to have a terrible season. The other thing that I think is important for everyone to understand is that a world in a fascist government, where markets don't function, everything's at the whim of the leader, where you got a whack job like Robert Kennedy assaulting medical science, assaulting scientific industrial complex, right, where space program is being destroyed, where the leading technology companies have to go give gold plated picture frames to Trump to curry favor in his pimped out Oval Office. All of that is like a mosquito sucking on your arm, right? Like, but instead of blood, right, it's opportunity that's bleaching out of the system, right? You attack the CDC, you attack the research universities, you attack and attack and attack, and you take down um, all of the soft power of the United States. And you look at the amount of tourism boycotting the country, you look at the economic conditions, you look what's coming in the fall, right? The Trump recession is coming down the tracks. And what MAGA Republicans are desperately trying to do is to rig the game in the middle of it with a mid decade redistricting, right?
Yep.
Because they want the politicians to pick the voters, and they want to change the allocation of the voters, because they know there's not enough voters to sustain them in power. So, right, you let the politicians pick their voters as a surefire route to get around the anger of the voters, and we just can't allow it. We can't allow it to happen in the country, because we're on the edge of losing something very, very important.
I agree. And yeah, as we wrap up today, Steve, I just want to make one appeal. I don't usually do this, but today has me accelerating some plans at TELUS News to ramp up some of the things we were going to start after Labor Day. And uh, we're going to be writing and doing videos at a much more increased clip, maybe not Steve Schmidt level, but a lot more. And we have big plans initially after Labor Day, hopefully before that. And we have a 1.4 thousand or 1,400 people on the live. If you're not a paid subscriber to TELUS News, I'd like to ask you to check it out and consider doing that. Likewise, if you're not a paid subscriber to The Warning, you should do that as well. We have big plans for the fall. The country is in crisis right now, the media, the corporate media, where I came out of earlier this year and spent 30 years in, is completely neutered and letting us down on a daily basis. And the independent voices here on Substack, to me, are the future and needed more than ever. And so I would humbly ask folks, check us out and become a paid subscriber if you can afford it. Everything I put out is free. The paid subscriptions is simply to show your support for what we're doing, and we want to ramp things up in a big way, starting on Labor Day. Hopefully, starting a little bit earlier than that. So, just put in that one plug, and it goes 100% for Steve as well.
Well, I just say, yeah, absolutely. Everybody, thank you so much for your support for joining today. And I just add to what Ryan said is that the country requires your voice and your friends' voices to say no, enough. The lying is Hitlerian. The lying is Soviet. Like the lying, if you were a kid like myself who grew up in the 80s, is fundamentally un-American. Right? The notion that we'll tell you that red is blue and up is down and down is right and left is up. And whatever the leader says is true. And if you're not in line with that, you're a terrorist or crazy or worse. That treason is not agreeing with Donald Trump. And so we have as a country a union of 340 million people, right? Donald Trump has no mandate to do this. He has no right to do this. He had one of the smaller election victories in the context of the history of the country. He had 49.5% of the vote, and he's got a 38% approval level. The American people do not approve of this. Constitution does not permit it, and our history does not abide it. And I just urge everyone to become engaged, to become involved, and do not be afraid. Instead, stand up and speak out and stand tall. Thank you for getting
Couldn't
on.
have said it better myself, man. Thank you, Steve. See you back here Monday. Thank you, everyone.
See ya.